Hello, everyone.
Hello.
I am glad to be here. As Ms. Walker said, there were several things trying to prevent me from getting here. So I always say then there must be something that you all need to hear. I'll be talking about just a topic to go off. The truth must be told. And I'll share a bit of my truth and some of my background. I noticed these emblems up here representing our services. As mentioned, I'm a veteran of the U.S. Army, 7 years active duty, 1 in the Texas Guard. And one of the things I noticed at the military interest program, processing stations, you'll see a sign in most of them that says Freedom's Front Door. Freedom's Front Door. So when young people are walking into the MEP station in order to join the military, they'll see a sign that says Freedom's Front Door. This is where you enter, the front door to protect our freedoms. That's one of the reasons why I thought it was so important to make it here, because I've enjoyed my freedoms. I've enjoyed the fact that as a veteran serving my country, there was more than one way to serve, not just in uniform, but also serve politically. I've enjoyed that. I noticed that with this particular organization, I saw freedom, family, faith, words such as that. Those are important. All those things are important. But I must tell my history as well. I hadn't always been a Republican. I'm from, hadn't always been one. I am from Louisiana originally. So I heard just this morning, I heard someone mention, doesn't matter if you're a native of Texan, if you just got here. Well, I've been here for 25 years. The military brought me to the area, to Fort Sam Houston and San Antonio 25 years ago. I call Texas home. I bleed Texas blood. Love Texas. And I'm glad I'm here. However, in Louisiana, growing up as a young man, there were several things that I was told. One of the things I was told when it came down to politics, I was told that black people vote Democrat. If y'all are not ready for shockers this morning, you're in the wrong place. Because you're going to get some shockers. But I'm transparent, and I'm going to tell you things that we need to hear in order to become better as a Republican Party, not only of Texas, but for the nation. So I was told we vote Democrat. And I remember being in middle school, and I remember during that time in middle school, they would teach us about all types of things political, but it was leaning one way. So I'll segue and point out that's why it's so important for us to make sure that we're taking control of not only city councils, but also our school boards, making sure we have conservatives on those school boards. I heard critical race theory mentioned, making sure that we can counter that by having the right people in place to speak on those things that'll be decision makers. Nevertheless, I was told that we were Democrats. We vote Democrat. And so I remember when I got a chance to cast my first vote as an 18-year-old, I was excited. It's like, yeah, we marched for this right. Well, at least my ancestors did. I said, I'm excited. And I remember walking down to the local library, which was walking distance from my home. And I remember going to cast that first vote. I remember how great of a moment it was. And I remember going in, and one thing was in mind. You gotta vote Democrat. So I went in and I voted Democrat. And I walked back, I was alone when I cast that first vote. And I walked back and said, I just cast my first vote. I had no clue who I was voting for. Just told vote for Democrat. So I said, okay, I did my civic duty. Well, it wasn't a thing that would change. For years, it would be the same. Even when I was casting absentee ballots as a soldier overseas, still casting the ballot for Democrats. It wasn't until about 11 years ago, as I was a pastor in a church, a senior pastor, and my Sunday school teacher was there on that particular day. And this is during, we'll go back, it was around Obama's first administration. And I remember before he became president, I saw a couple of heads shaking. I've got to give you some truth on this. During this time, I remember when he was running, and we live in the city of Selma, not too far from here. And my daughter and I, we were there, and I said, you know what? He's running for office. I said, why don't we go down the road? Because he was literally walking distance from my home. I can walk to where he was going to be speaking in 7 to 8 minutes. I said, we should go. It's so close. Let's just go just in case he happens to win. At least we can say we saw a president. So we went down, we heard him speak, he was very articulate and all that great stuff, and it's like, oh wow, sounds great. So we eventually cast ballots, he won. 2 years into his office, 2 years into his administration, started looking at things from not just a secular eye, but a spiritual eye, biblical eye, faithful eye. I started noticing things that was contrary to my beliefs. And the conversations began to emerge between the Sunday school teacher and I and my wife. And as we began to talk about things, we realized, wait a minute, he's supporting things and doing things that are contrary to our Judeo-Christian, constitutional, conservative beliefs. So we knew we were in somewhat of a bind and a situation that we had to resolve. I remember the Sunday school teacher introducing us to video. He said, hey, here's a video. Have you ever heard of David Barton? How many of y'all have heard of David Barton? David Barton's an awesome guy. I've been able to have the pleasure of meeting David, having a private tour of wall builders, speaking with him for several hours, have him on speed dial in my cell phone right over there. So David's an excellent guy, awesome individual. But before I met David, got a chance to speak with David, we saw this video called America in black and white. My wife and I, we took that video home. We watched it that night. After we watched that video, America in black and white, which literally laid out the truth, because the truth must be told. And indeed, it will set you free. The truth must be told. David told the truth. What I found out is the history of the Republican Party, and I found out about how it coincided with Black America and freedom and so much more. I found out that how it started with the Republican Party in 1854 in Wisconsin to stop the spread of slavery. Kansas-Nebraska Act to stop that. David Barton in his video, he talked about so much more than that. He pointed out how the first blacks in Congress were Republicans. Pointed these things out. And so by the time we watched this video and completed it, my wife and I looked at each other that night and we said, we're Republicans. There was no doubt that we were Republicans. And so at that point, we really continued to talk and said, how did we go so long voting against our own interests? How did we do it? We finally came to a conclusion. We can't go back, but we can move forward. We believe without a doubt, because that conversation ensued in the church, it was for such a time like this. We believed also that it was not my time or her time to come over to the Republican Party at previous times, but for such a time like this. And so by the time we became Republicans, we said, well, we have to have that all-important conversation with our children. We had never talked politics, hadn't discussed it. There was not a need to discuss politics. We taught them right from wrong. We taught them to respect authority. We taught them to honor our military. We taught them to honor God. We taught them about faith. We taught them about finances. We taught them about the future. We taught them to honor our country. We taught them all these things, but we didn't talk politics. But we were at a crossroad and the time had come because we saw how important politics was. We saw that it could affect the future. It could affect the family. It could affect our freedom of religion, our faith. It could affect our constitutional rights and privileges. So we had to pull the Constitution out at some point. And so we had the conversation. We sat them down. We said, we need to talk to you all about something. At the time, we only had 2 of our 3 that was of voting age. We thought, wow, this is going to be a difficult conversation. So we brought them into our bedroom like we normally do. They're laid across beds and sitting in recliners and chairs, and they're like, what is this conversation about? Not the room. So they were in the room, not sure what the conversation's about. The youngest, which is here, my youngest son, he wasn't of voting age at the time. So he's there just to listen in because he needs to know too. So both mom and dad, we're here and we tell them we hadn't talked to you all about politics, but we want to share something with you all. We've had a transition of sort. Over the last week or so, we've been really going into politics, and we've watched the video and did some research and some studying. And for years, we've voted one way, and that way has been Democrat. And we just wanted to let you all know we're no longer Democrats, we're Republicans. Well, the two oldest looked at us, and they said, "You are?" And the response is what just silenced us both. One at a time, but almost simultaneously, they both said, "We are already Republicans." They had been Republicans, not just any Republicans, but they were hard right Republicans. And out of their mouths they said, "We thought you all were." We had raised them, again, to believe in Judeo-Christian constitutional values. We raised them to respect our country, our flag, our military, our law enforcement, and so much more. So when they were in high school, at Judson High School in Converse, Texas, yes, go Judson, Judson Rockets. So at Judson, they were able to go through the same teacher who gave them a blank slate of priorities and platforms and asked them to choose what you believe in and what leaning do you have. They didn't see Republican or Democrat. Both were heavy to the right. They were Republicans, so they said, "We found out in high school, before we can vote, based on how you all raised us, we've been voting Republican from the time we can vote because that's who we found out we were." Why do I bring that up? Because the truth needs to be told. What we're not being told is that indeed the Republican Party was founded in 1854 to stop the spread of slavery with the Kansas-Nebraska Act. We're not being told that the Freedmen's Bureau, of which became what it was because of the 38th Congress, and that 38th Congress, which was definitely heavily leaning towards Republicans at the time, that 38th Congress and the Freedmen's Bureau made sure that black people that were being freed were able to learn to read and write. They were able to help with food, health care, and legal assistance. They were able to aid them with employment contracts with landowners. We're not being told this stuff. I wasn't told this stuff in high school. I wasn't told about the Freedmen's Bureau and the support of the Republican Party, whereby they provided rights for the distribution of land and schools for the children that were now newly freed. Wasn't told about the fact that this same Freedmen's Bureau that was supported by this Republican Congress helped reunite freed black people with their families. Wasn't told about this. Today we see the racial tension, and there's a lot of racial tension. I'm gonna give you some things that by the time I'm done, you'll have some things to think about leaving here. It would be the 39th Congress who held the Republican majority that passed the Civil Rights Act of 1866 and the 14th Amendment, granting full citizenship to former slaves. But we're not told that. We're not told that. Especially not in schools. People are not told that. So what do they hear? Here's a shocker. They hear that Republicans are old white men. That's what they hear. And how many of you, just by show of hands, you don't have to raise them, how many of you have heard the Republican Party is made up of old white racists? Anyone ever heard that? Right? That's what I heard as well. I told y'all, you're going to get some shocking, but the truth must be told. I am a Republican. All right. But the truth must be told. Why do I tell you all this? Because when we think about the makeup of things, we have to begin to tell the truth to shift things the right way. I know my son, who's the youngest, and he's now a strong Republican. Strong Republican. He's gone viral several times on TikTok. He's been banned on TikTok from his advertising. So when I told him, son, when you get banned, welcome, you have made it. This text right here that you all see today, it had me banned from Facebook from ever advertising again. And I asked him, I said, how is it that you banned me for an advertisement that you approved, and I've advertised as a U.S. congressional candidate for years? You've gotten thousands upon thousands of my dollars, but I have one book that you approved for advertisement. 2 weeks into it, you banned the book from being advertised, and banned me from ever advertising on Facebook again. And basically their response was, you know what you did. in layman's terms. In layman's terms. Because I said, how could I get banned for a book that I am the author of with truths that you can verify for yourself, because I put references for everything that's written? Their response, you violated personal responsibility and you've impacted others. Basically what they're saying in a negative way. I told the truth. Now they may see me in court, who knows? Maybe time. But the point I'm making is that, why is it that this truth people don't want to hear? President Trump caught on. Some of the things I write about in this book is that President Trump's team, they knew that places like Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, do those places sound familiar? Yeah, they sound familiar. I wrote about it. Because in the Bible, there's a thing called Daniel, a book called Daniel. Daniel talks about the writing on the wall. You know your history, you'll be all right. I knew that history showed us that Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, states like that, the only reason that they were able to flip, well, a couple of reasons I shall say, those states went towards Obama during his time. But when Hillary Clinton decided that she wanted to run, she didn't have much luck. President Trump was able to get those states just 4 years later. Why? Because the black vote did not show up for her. So President Trump, his team, was cognizant enough to realize the black vote was the difference maker in him winning those states and ultimately winning the presidency of the United States, winning the office of president of the United States. So what did his team do? They went after those states intentionally. Of course, we didn't see North Carolina on the radar. We didn't see what was taking place in Arizona. We didn't see what was taking place in places like Nevada and Georgia. But we know for a fact that when it comes down to the black vote, it was a difference maker in several states, and all it took was just a few of those black votes not to show up. President Trump said, we're going to do better than that. We're going to make sure that we go after the black vote by showing them results. Lowest unemployment they've seen in decades, the black community, in decades.
Highest wages.
Yes, highest wages, when we look at things like that. And so he went after it. When we look at things right now, 150 plus years ago, the black vote proved to be invaluable at the highest level of government for the Republican Party. It was people like President Grant who won the popular vote in 1868, won the popular vote for president in 1868 election, although he failed to get the majority of the white vote. It was ultimately a victory that hinged on 400,000 votes from black people. But we're not told this. We're not told this. Black people are not told that you played a pivotal role in the 1800s in ensuring that a Republican president was elected. What we're not told as well, it was largely, and this is why they wanted it blocked, because I write about it. It was largely a Democrat problem when it came down to grandfather clauses whereby former slaves could vote. No former slaves, rather, could vote. Jim Crow laws, because they blame Republicans now. You all do know that. Right? They blame Republicans. They say, oh, yes, look at you all with the Jim Crow laws, and this is Jim Crow 202. This is the grandfather clause. You're trying to bring it all back. That was you. You do know that, Democrats. That was you all that did that. Suppressive election procedures. Sound familiar? black codes and enforce segregation, whites only primaries, physical intimidation and violence, rewriting state constitutions, etc. That was all Democrats. All Democrats. People said, well, there was a flip. Didn't they switch? Didn't they switch parties? That's a myth. And I destroy that myth in this text as well. It's totally destroyed. It was a myth. Totally destroyed. But what I tell them, they said, well, what happened? Why is it now that the Republican Party looks like it looks now? I've reached out to Republican leadership in the past at the national level and here at the state level. Sometimes those quests, I would say, come back void. Sometimes they don't. How many of you all were at the 2018 convention in San Antonio? State convention. Okay, a few of you all were there. I was there at that state convention. At the time, I was a candidate for U.S. Congress, Congressional District 15. And I remember being at that convention, and I walked around that convention, and one of the things that I noticed, at the time it was roughly 7, 8, 9,000, I forget the amount. It was just under in that convention. And as we walked around, I noticed that the convention was unique, but I saw less than 100 people that looked like me. Thousands of people in the convention, but less than 100 that looked like me. How many of y'all know that if you want to build a muscle up, you have to tear it down? And it hurts when that muscle is starting to regrow. Some of the things I tell you may hurt, but we have to regrow. So when I was at that convention, I said, here we have a problem. Houston, we have a problem. Do y'all know that we had more blacks in the U.S. House and the Senate in the 1800s than we do right now? We had more back then that were Republicans. Let me be specific. We had more black Republicans in our U.S. Congress in the 1800s than we do right now. So when I looked at the convention in 2018, I said, Houston, we have a problem. Someone asked me, what's the problem? How did we get here? Because Republicans, unfortunately, how many of you all know that sometimes the truth ain't what we want to hear? Republicans, we've missed opportunities. We've missed opportunities. They said, how did we get here? How did we get to this point where we're at now? How did we get here? I said, how much time do you have? I can give you the long version or the short version. I'll give you a shorter version right now. For the sake of time, I will give you all a shorter version of how did we get here. We got here because of missed opportunities. There was a shift in focus. Republicans, of course, when we look at the great state of Texas, this Republican Party that we have in the great state of Texas was formed on July 4th of 1867. It was formed in Houston, Texas, with 150 black men and 20 Anglos. Wow. 150 black men started the Republican Party of Texas and 20 Anglos. But we're not told that. We're not told that. We're not told that. The second chairman for the Republican Party of Texas was a black man by the name of Norris Wright Cooney out of Houston, Texas. He was a black man in the 1800s. But people are not told that. When I began telling this to people in the community, especially people that are part of different organizations, Norris Wright Cooney, he was also the first Grand Master of the Prince Hall Masons, of which most black people are associated with, that are part of the Masonic organization. So when I talked to the black Masons and they said, why are you a Republican? I said, well, you celebrate Norris Wright Cooney Day every year, don't you? Yes. Did you know he was a Republican? Not only was he a Republican, he was the chairman of the Republican Party of Texas. Oh, wow, no. Didn't know that. Then the conversation shifts. We have to tell that truth. We have to tell them about people like William McDonald. William McDonald was the first black millionaire in the state of Texas. First black millionaire. We hear about places in Oklahoma, Greenwood, and places like that, but William McDonald, the things that he did, he was a chair as well. The things he did in the state of Texas, we don't hear about. So how do we get to where we're at? Because in about 6 short years, from 1867 to 1872-73 time frame, there was something that was taking place. Republicans held the Texas House, Republicans held the Texas Senate, and Republicans held the governor's office. So in 6 years or so, 1867 to 1872 to 3, Republicans was in charge. Does that look similar to today?
No.
Well, we have the House, Republicans. We have the Senate. And do we have a Republican governor? Okay, so what I'm going to share with you all, again, if you know your history, it's extremely important so you can avoid the hiccups of the past. The reasons, and there are several reasons that Republicans lost the power that they had. They controlled the House, the Senate, and of course the governor's office, 1867, 68, 69, 70, 71, 72, 73. By 73, they lost it all. And how so? They gained control because all of these newly freed blacks, they knew about the Freedmen's Bureau. And Republicans were intentionally telling them, look, we were a part of the process to make sure you gained your freedom. And they made sure that by the time General Granger showed up in Galveston, Texas, letting the slaves know that they were free through the Emancipation Proclamation, another word came as well, to make sure you get these newly free, newly enfranchised blacks registered to vote. So as they're registering them to vote, who do they have a loyalty to? The Republican Party. That loyalty was to the Republican Party. They believed in similar things: faith, family, new freedom, and so much more. Democrats, meanwhile, Southern Democrats, Dixiecrats, as some will even call them, they're scrambling, trying to figure out how do we gain power. So even in the 1800s, Democrats were trying to lure black people over by offering free barbecue. Yes. Even in the 1800s. But they didn't stop there. Republicans, on the other hand, they were divided. Unfortunately, most people don't even know that Republicans, from the very inception of the Republican Party of Texas, dealt with division. Right now, I hear the word conservative, and conservative, yes, it's a good name now if you say you're conservative. But back then, in the 1800s, to say that you were a conservative in Texas was not good when it came down to those that were far right, because they were viewed as radicals. So you had the conservatives that were led by Andrew J. Hamilton versus the radicals, which would be your far right today. The ones that call themselves, that call ourselves rather conservatives today, you would have been called radicals in the 1800s. So you had a divide. Edmund J. Davis and Morgan C. Hamilton, who was the brother, right, of Andrew Hamilton, he was on one side. So there was a split from the very beginning. They were seeing things differently, and it came down to their view on platforms. What was important when it came down to platforms? Conservatives saw one thing as important, radicals saw another, but radicals had an upper hand. Radicals were the ones that were out there getting the black vote. They were out there making sure that blacks were being registered. They were the ones out there that were grassroots at the time, boots on the ground. They were the ones. And because of that, they were able to get who they wanted elected. There was a split so bad in the beginning, by 1868, radicals and conservatives, they had separate conventions. Could you all picture that today? Separate conventions. They even set up separate slates of people they wanted elected to office. Radicals won out, and the reason they won out was because of the black vote. That's why they won out. I'll go so far as to tell you that there was a divide so bad during this time because of platform issues that they wanted to divide Texas up. One side of Texas was going to be simply called Texas, and the other was going to be called West Texas. Yes. Yes. But it didn't go through. Most people don't know it. That wasn't the only time, though. It was at least 5 times they wanted to divide Texas up into pieces. But why do I bring that up? Because if you all can't see the parallel, you can't see the mirror image of what's taking place. Republicans won at the time in 1800s, again, from 1867 to 1873, they were controlling everything. But by 1873, they had lost control of the House, the Senate, and the governor's office. Why? Because they had a shift. How many of you all may or may not have heard of this shift. We know about Sam Houston, but what about Andrew Houston? What about Andrew Houston, his son? Most don't know about Andrew Houston. Andrew Houston wanted to do something a little bit different. He wanted to go more towards the national politics, and in doing so, he lost sight of the black vote. And so the term Lily White Movement, which was coined by the second chairman of the Republican Party, Norris Wright Cooney, a black man, he coined the term Lily White Movement. And it was because of Andrew Houston, who wanted to shift the focus away from the agrarian, biracial-based component of which the Republican Party was originally formed. He wanted to shift from that. In doing so, Democrats were sitting in the cut saying, oh, you're going to leave those black votes alone? We will take them. We will go after them. And went so far as people like Andrew Hamilton, unfortunately, he was so desperate for power, he went trying to secure endorsements of Democrats. And in doing so, that split the conservative side. And again, I'm speaking about Texas. Radicals, they were also beginning to see a little weakness. So long story short, they lost sight of what was taking place. Democrats came in, wooed the black vote as much as possible, and so that was the first downfall. That was by 1873. If we fast forward, I'm just giving you the short version again. Some of you historians out there maybe look and say, well, you missed this. You missed this. Because I've had it happen. I had someone email me before I got on the highway. You didn't cover it. I only had an hour. What do you want me to do? Have a private conversation, we can. But so I'm just giving you the main point. So another major move was by the time we get to the 30s, we hear about people like FDR, Franklin D. Roosevelt, and the New Deal. 1930s, you all know what was happening. Those that know history, we know about the Great Depression. Great Depression was taking place. And so that's why I said the Republican Party, if I had to summarize the Republican Party over the last 150 years, I'd say the Republican Party has done a lot of wonderful things, a lot of great things, a lot of magnificent things. You've been conservatives where you needed to be, not in 1800s, but later on. But you've had missed opportunities. One missed opportunity. FDR, he's coming along. Black people, as well as everyone else, was suffering during the Great Depression. FDR comes along, and again, I reference this in the book. FDR comes along, and he says, you know what? I'll do some things that'll help all people. And even though black people were not getting their fair share at the time, they knew it, but they said it's better than nothing. So black people, that was the first, the second major shift. During the Great Depression, they started to get what we now can look at as handouts, right? Government assistance. And so blacks said, well, we're getting some type of government assistance. And I'm not just regulating to blacks because all people were getting this assistance during this time, and there was only a small fraction where they can say that this assistance actually proved to be the greatest difference maker. But that was the beginning of another shift. So in the 1930s, that took place. If we were to fast forward just a little bit, by the time we get to 1964, about 30 plus years later, another major shift took place with another person with 3 letters, LBJ, Lyndon B. Johnson, another Democrat. People look and they say, well, what are you going to say bad about Texas? Oh, Lyndon B. Johnson. Well, you got to give me the truth. You take it how you want. But before Democrat President Lyndon B. Johnson was President Lyndon B. Johnson, before he signed the Civil Rights Act of 1964, he was then Senator Lyndon B. Johnson. So I tell him, I said, you love talking about the Civil Rights Act of 1964. You love the photo optics of him signing Civil Rights Act of 64 with Martin Luther King in the room. Yes, from EMS guy, Martin Luther King was in the room. He's signing that. And so they took those optics and they ran with them. Democrats ran with them. But the truth is that when Lyndon B. Johnson was a senator in 1956, there was an act that went through, a Civil Rights Act of 1956. That Civil Rights Act was tore apart so much so by Senator Lyndon B. Johnson that by the time it did pass and get down to the states, it was so watered down, states were able to change their constitutions and render it almost useless. It's the only reason we needed a Civil Rights Act of 1964. Because of the damage that Senator Lyndon B. Johnson did to the one of 56. So by the time we get to 64, he's president, he signs off on it. The optics are at this time that Democrats have saved the day. And Democrats have saved black people with the Civil Rights Act of 64. Republicans had a missed opportunity. There should have been PR people on that thing until they couldn't stop talking, couldn't stop writing, couldn't stop speaking. Saying, yes, he may have signed it, but let's tell you the truth about where the majority of my time's up. I was trying to get the short version. All right, but I won't keep you all much longer. That is a good cue. So, but the point is, we saw one change after the next. The next one would come by the time we get to 1984 and 88. There was a person by the name of Reverend Jesse Jackson. He ran for president both in 84 and 88. He wasn't thinking he was going to win, but he was running, and what did he do? He had a huge voter registration drive. Everywhere he went, they were registering voters all over the United States. What voters do you think they were registering? Black voters. And who were these black voters going to vote for? Yeah, Jesse Jackson, you weren't going to get the nomination, but now Jesse Jackson had a little power. So if you wanted those votes that were going to Jesse Jackson, you had to work with Reverend Jesse Jackson. And those votes still did not disappear. So Democrats had a huge boost during 1984 and 88. Do we see that happening now? Yeah. How did Beto, or what's his real name? Robert Francis O'Rourke? Yes. How did Robert try to do this thing, right? Robert, with the Democrats, tried to register new voters. And they were successful in registering new voters. So what do we have to do as Republicans? We have to make sure that we not only match and not only stay on the defense, but we have to go on the offensive. Making sure that the truth must be told. We tell people the truth about the Republican Party. The Republican Party is not this racist organization you call it. This is how I stop people, because one of the number one questions I'm asked when I speak to groups like yours, when it's all over, people will catch me in a corner and say, hey, I should fight you.
What? What'd you say?
I had a question for you. That was intentional, so no one else could hear it. They'd asked that question. I said, what's your question? They said, what do I say to black people that say that say that again?
You tell them the truth.
One more time.
You tell them the truth.
Did I pay you? All right.
That's what I do.
That's what you do. You tell them the truth. But guess what? Many people can't tell them the truth that they don't know, right? That's why it's so important for us to know these truths, to be able to tell them these truths. So when I'm talking to groups, the first thing they'll say, well, there was a big switch. Once I kill the myth, I say, okay, can we continue the conversation? Okay, well, what about this? I'll kill that. Can we continue the conversation? What happens is people will be on emotions versus intellect. Emotions drive many people to the polls and drive their vote. Republicans, the ones I've spoken with, most of us, we want to talk about facts. Folks don't care about your facts until you can calm their emotions down. So what I tell them, I said, all right, let's start at a safe place. I said, can we agree? Can we both agree, if it's two of us, can we both agree that there's likely racists in pretty much any organization you point out when it comes down to politics? Yeah. Well, yeah, I can agree with problems with racists. Yes, okay, so we're done with that. Can we agree that when it comes down to personalities, that we're going to have some flawed personalities when it comes down to political parties? Yeah, there are going to be some flawed people. They have flaws. I said, okay, so we're done with that. So we can agree there are racists that are likely part of each party. There are people that have flaws that's likely part of each party. Each party has some history they're probably not as proud of. Can you agree? Yeah, I can agree to that. So we're done with that, right? Yes, we're not going to bring that back up, right? Well, no. Yes, let's know. We're done with that because you've agreed that we have problems. So I'll be the first to tell you. As a pastor, one of the things people used to tell me all the time said, I don't come to church because there are hypocrites in the church. But you sure shop at Walmart. There are hypocrites while ringing you up. You go to work and you probably work for a hypocrite, but you're not quitting your job. So I'll agree, there are hypocrites in the church, but that's not why you're here. So we rule out all that. Now we can begin to have a conversation, and what I tell them, I point out to them the platforms, and I say, are you okay with this? Are you okay with that? And I begin to point out to them, especially when it comes to African Americans, I point out to them that when it comes down to us, there was a woman by the name of Margaret Sanger who started Planned Parenthood, who intentionally placed Planned Parenthood facilities right in walking distance of black neighborhoods, and that wiped out, since that inception of all that Planned Parenthood stuff, has wiped out almost 50% of the black population. Sure. And Democrats still support it right now in 2021. How can I, in good conscience, support an organization that has wiped out almost half of my population? I point this out to them. Once I begin to point these things out to them, when I begin to point it out to them, that's when things click. Some will walk away, not Republicans, but they'll walk away with some new thoughts. They'll walk away with some new truths. They'll walk away with some new options. So how do we deal with this? How do we deal with this? I'll close in 10 minutes or less. That's the pastor in me. But I will close in 10 minutes or less. What's that again?
Are you giving an altar?
Oh, we can do the altar. Now I'm glad she mentioned that. That'll segue me to another point. Using my audience. That'll segue me. When it comes down to Republicans, we are a party of faith. Wouldn't you all agree we're a party of faith?
Yes.
Yes, that's all right. Let's go ahead and clap for that. We have to be able to capitalize off that, use that. When it comes down to freedom of religion and things of that nature, we have to point out that it's Republicans that's trying to make sure that we have the freedom of religion, that we can indeed go and worship like we want to worship without having to worry about all those great concerns. I used to tell people, they said, well, I can't talk about that because there's a difference, the separation of church and state. I began to educate them on that we were trying to make sure the church was protected from the government, not the other way around. And so when I began to educate them on that, when I tell them there was only one time in the history of the United States that a church had its 501c3 snatched away from them because they were talking about politics, they said, just once? I said, yes, when there was one church put a full-page ad out on then Bill Clinton, right? President Bill Clinton, he was running. But that church lost a 501c3, but guess what? The IRS don't want to navigate in that territory. That's why it's not common. People think it will happen, but look and see how many times this actually happened. So I began to tell them these things and let them know it's Republicans that's fighting for your Judeo-Christian constitutional rights, not Democrats. We have to tell this truth. We have to tell this truth. So what do? History shows a lot of things, and I can go through that, but as trailblazers, and that's who we are, we have to tell the truth about people who've done great things in the past. The Republican Party must arrive. I'll leave you all with these things in close. The Republican Party must arrive. It must arrive at an understanding of the black Republicans' plight to truly understand their fight. Showing up during election time at the church won't do. Not enough. It's not enough. You can have the right message, and I do believe that our Republican Party has the right message. I wholeheartedly believe it. I believe in our platform. I believe in it. That's why I'm here. That's why I sacrifice time to come. No matter what obstacles got in the way, as I told Ms. Walker, I will be there. You all are literally my last public speaking engagement that I booked. Everything else I canceled. I got an engagement request yesterday, and I get them often, quite often, but I have to turn them down. This was the last one. As you mentioned, my commitment. I'm loyal and I'm committed. If I said I'll do it, I'm going to do it. We have to make sure that we have the right messenger. You can have the right message, but if you don't have the right messenger, you got to follow deaf ears. This
So
pen
why
that I'm
are you
wearing.
stopping?
What's that again?
Why are you stopping?
Stopping what?
Doing this.
There's another obligation I can't discuss right now. So, as I as I told the people that wrote on a request yesterday, they'll be getting a notice that I'll be available, as I told them, on evenings if you're in the San Antonio region, such as you all in this region, but the day obligation is the only one that I'll do moving forward. Weekends, I'll speak, so I'll be on stage with some phenomenal people in October on one weekend up there. I think David Barton may be on stage during that time, Ted Cruz's father, so a lot of great people will be on stage at that time. And so those obligations I'm holding to, but I will point out that we have to have the right messengers. This pin that I'm wearing, when Alan West announced that he was running for governor, one of the things you'll notice if you look at the video, if you hadn't seen it, he's wearing this lapel pin. This lapel pin is from a new organization because we had to go on the offense in Texas. This new organization is now a part of the Republican Party of Texas, officially recognized. It's called 151st Black Men of Texas. That's FIRST, which stands for Fierce, Impactful, Republican, Strong Trailblazers. Yes, yes. What you'll see the 150 on there. You'll also see the Roman number 20, 2 X's there, which represents the 20 Anglos that were there as well during that meeting when the Republican Party of Texas started. On 150bmot.com, 150, the number 150bmot, you will find lots of information about the Republican Party of Texas and its history. You'll find lots of information about these black Republicans. 150, the number 150, B like boy, M like Mike, Oscar Tango, that's the military came out, OT.com. So you'll find that information there. So maybe you don't know where to go when someone, a minority or a black person comes and they don't know what to tell you, or you don't know what to tell them. Point them to the site. Point them to timwesley.com. Point them to my website, timwesley.com. Say, hey, here's some information on the history. We're not who you think we are, but we want to show you the truth of who we actually are. So let them know Republicans must capitalize on the involvement of a few black people within the party and learn how to reach and attract more. A lot of times people don't want to speak with folks that don't look like them. And so it's going to be important for us to make sure that we're engaging with people that are part of the Republican Party to say, hey, here's a message we want to send out with you. Go ahead and share this message with people that you know. And this organization will do just that. I want to close by pointing out that all is not lost. We have an opportunity. The alarm has been sounded. The alarm has been sounded. If we do not capitalize on the fact that we're still a red state right now, if we don't capitalize on that, we'll lose it. I want to close out with this last fact, that when we look from 1867 to 1873, Republicans held the House, the Senate, and the governor's office here in the state of Texas. When they lost all three, it would be 120 plus years before they regained. It wouldn't be until 1995, moving forward, that we would regain the House in Texas, the Senate, and the governor's office. So that's only been just over 25 years. So if you don't think we can lose the House, the Senate, and the governor's office, look at history, and it will show you it's happened before, and it can happen again. But I want to tell y'all, not on my watch. That's why I'm